Anything? What did you do, Lydia?
We threw fireworks at our neighbor's house.
Saw fireworks at a neighbor. What did you do, Abby?
I helped my friends dig out some of their shoes, help them prepare for their.
Oh, we helped with the
And I
pool.
went to bed and I watched Star Wars until the fireworks.
And you watched Star Wars until the fireworks.
Well,
What
no,
did
she
you do?
doesn't like fireworks.
More fireworks. Everybody seems to be watching fireworks. I'm not sure why. Why is it that they associate fireworks with the 4th of July? Why is that? You know?
Celebrate.
What do you think, Abby?
Eh,
Oh, I can't remember.
Having a blast.
I wish our resident historian, Hobart Brown, was here. He's forgotten more about history than I'll ever know. But I wanted to talk about the 4th of July and why we celebrate the 4th of July. Well, it all goes back to the year 1757. Boy, that's over 250 years ago. That's even older than I am. But in the year 1757, there was a war. There was a war between France and England. And as our friend Hobart Brown, who's an historian, would tell us, and if he comes into the lake, I want him to evaluate what's been said here. But those two countries are always at war. France and England are always at war. And they called that war the 7 Years' War. It started in 1757. So, 1757, what year did it end? 58? What do you think, Joey? 1764. It ended in 1764. And the Americans, in America, they call it the French and Indian War, because the British were fighting the French and the Indians were helping the French. And it went on for 7 years. And, you know, eventually the English people won. And you know what? Wars can be very, very expensive, can't they? You got to pay for the troops coming all the way from England to America. You got to pay for their guns. Well, they had muskets in those days with little lead balls. And you got to pay for the food for the troops, and you got to pay all this expense. So who's going to pay for that war? Well, the British said the American colonies should pay for the war because that's where the war was fought. So you know what they did? They passed a Stamp Act in the year 1765. Can you show what this, Lily, can you show everybody, stand up and show everybody what the Stamp Act is? Well, that's a picture of what a stamp would look like. Now, Jack, stand up once a minute. When you think of a stamp, you think of a postage stamp. But it's not really, it's an embosser. Show everybody the embosser. Now, that's my own personal embosser. I emboss my books with it. But that's what they were talking about when they talked about the Stamp Act. It was an embosser on every piece of paper that you would buy. If you were going to buy a deck of cards, it had to be embossed. If you bought a magazine or a newspaper, it all had to be embossed. And it was all very expensive. It was a tax on the American people. Any kind of paper product that they used had to be stamped. So they called it the Stamp Act, and the people were really, really upset about it. They had to pay all that money. Well, a couple of years ago, they had to pay all that money for the Stamp Act, and then there was a man by the name of Townsend, Charles Townsend, and he was the exchequer of England. Anybody know what an exchequer is? An exchequer is the man that controls the treasury, and he controlled the treasury in England. He said he came up with a great idea. He said, you know what we can do? We can tax those colonies. We'll tax them for everything they take into their country, whether it's glass or paint or lead or anything, we'll tax them. Oh, so that really, really got the Americans really, really angry. And that was passed in 1767. But you know what else? They had British troops living here in America. And the colonists would say, well, why do we have troops? The war is over. Why do we have to take care of all these troops? And you know what? The British troops had to stay in people's houses. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine, Lydia, if there was a Russian soldier living here and you had to allow him to stay in your house? Maybe you got your own room and maybe you have to go live with Abby now because you got to make room for the Russian soldier. Wouldn't that be terrible? Maybe not so much. I was thinking about that this morning. If he'd help out with mowing the lawn, and maybe take the dog for a walk, and take care of the dog's business, and maybe vacuum the rug, maybe it wouldn't be so bad having the soldier. Maybe they would even do more than some children we have. But anyway, there was this great tension between the American colonists and the British. And one day, in the spring of 1770, there was a British soldier. His name was Hugh White, and he was on the street corner, and he got to get into a fight with all these American colonists. Oh, they started throwing sticks at him, and they started throwing snowballs at him. Oh, it was just all, they were just so nasty to him. And then, you know what? There was a bunch of other British soldiers that saw what was going on, and they came over and they interfered. And you know what they did? They shot and killed 5 American colonists. Who's got the picture of the Boston Massacre? Show everybody, Abby. Stand up and show everybody the Boston Massacre. That's what it looked like. In the streets of Boston, they actually shot 5 people. And the people of Boston called that the Boston Massacre. Well, later on, in the year 1773, they had a tax on tea. Now, I love to drink tea. I'm English, so the English people love to drink. I have a cup of tea every day. And the American colonists were English people too, so they love tea. So the English said, what we'll do is we'll tax the tea. Every time they bring tea into the country, we'll put a tax on that. So you know what happened? A bunch of guys went into Boston Harbor, and there were 3 ships full of tea, and they dressed up as Indians. And you know what they did? They took all the tea and they dumped it into the Boston Harbor. Joey, what's that?
And they're called Sons of Liberty.
They were called the Sons of Liberty. Boy, you were paying attention in school. And who's got a picture of the Boston Tea Party? Can you show people the Boston Tea Party? They dumped 90,000 pounds of tea into the Boston Harbor. You know what that's worth? Take a guess.
$1 million.
Bingo. You really figured that out well. Yeah, it was worth about $1 million. Darn good at math, little girl. You were really good. So the Americans there was so much tension. There was so much hatred between the British and the Americans. So the British, the Americans had a Congress. What's a Congress? A Congress is just where people come together and discuss how to find ideas, how to solve.
They make laws.
They make laws. But they had the First Continental Congress in 1774, and they decided to write a letter to King George III. And so they wrote a letter to King George III and said, would you please stop taxing us so much? And maybe we could get some representation, because the American colonists had nothing to say about what was going on. They just got the orders from England, and so the Americans said, could we just have representation? Could you just stop taxing us so much? You know what King George did? He did nothing. He just ignored it. So the colonists got very angry, and they began to get all their arms they could find, all the guns, and they took them up to a place called Lexington. And they massed a place where they could keep all the guns, because they were starting a militia. But the British found out about it, and they were going to go up and they were going to catch Samuel Adams and John Hancock. Samuel Adams and John Hancock are the ringleaders, or they're the important leaders in the American Revolution. So the British were going to come up and get them. And there was a man that rode a horse that night to warn those people that the British were coming. Do you know who that man was? Anybody know who it was? Anybody hear of the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere? Paul Revere rode all the way from Boston up to Lexington to warn the people that the British were coming. Paul Revere did a lot of things. He was a silversmith, and he made a lot of plates and a lot of important stuff made out of silver. He was also one of the Sons of Liberty. He actually went on that ship and helped turn over the tea. He went on the ride to warn the British. Paul Revere did a lot of things. You know, in the late 1960s, he actually started a rock group. No. I'm just kidding. But after that, the British and the Americans met. The British came up there, but the Americans were ready for them at the fields of Lexington. Does anybody have the Battle of Lexington before? Who's got the Battle of Lexington? Show everybody the Battle of Lexington.
He's got them all.
She's got them all. There's the Battle of Lexington. The British came, and the Americans were ready for them. And there was a captain by the name of John Parker. He was in charge of the Americans. And John Parker said, don't shoot first. Wait till you're shot at. Well, something happened. Somebody fired a gun. We don't know who it was. Was it American? Was it a Brit? We don't really know who shot first. but somebody shot, and that's what started the American Revolution. There was a man by the name of Ralph Waldo Emerson. He said that was the shot that was heard round the world. And when you hear that term, the shot heard round the world, that's what he's talking about. It was the start of the American Revolution. So it wasn't much of a war. There was only a few Brits, and there was a few Americans, but the Americans went up to Concord, and then they fought the British again. And this time, the Americans defeated them, and the British hightailed it out. And that's how the American Revolution got started. Well, 2 years after that, they signed the Declaration of Independence. And they signed it on July... What day did they sign the Declaration of Independence?
I think it was
July 4th.
No, actually, Joey, that's close. They signed it on July 2nd, and then on July 4th, they voted. And they voted to make it America an independent country. So that's the day that America became an independent country. And then from then on, they had all these battles and all these wars. And eventually, in the year 1781, the Americans won the battle. And we became a free country. And that's why we celebrate the 4th of July. Now, I want to read something. It's from the book of Romans.
yeah.
And it says this: everyone must submit himself to the governing authorities, for there is no authority that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, he who rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment upon themselves. That's basically the same idea that Peter says. In 1 Peter chapter 2, Peter says that we, as Christians, are to submit ourselves to the authority of the government. And in the book of Proverbs, teaches us that we should never side with those in rebellion. So, let me ask you, were the Americans justified in rebelling against Great Britain? Well, they believe that they were. Probably their best argument is simply that they were fighting a defensive war against Great Britain. They looked at it like this. Remember the Boston Massacre? They were fighting a defensive war to stop people from massacring them. And remember what Colonel John Parker said at the Battle of Lexington? He said, "Don't shoot first. Wait till they shoot you." So the Americans really felt that they were fighting a defensive war. And the other idea that plays into this too comes from 1 Peter chapter 2, where Peter says that you submit your authorities as unto the Lord. And so they felt that they respected government, but they didn't respect the people that ran the government. They felt that the British were tyrants. And there's a quote from the time of the Revolution, and it says, "Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God." And various men, that's been attributed to various men, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, various others. We don't really know who originated the statement, but that was the battle cry. Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. So they didn't feel that they were rebelling against the government. They felt they were rebelling against people that were oppressive to people, and that God would be pleased with what they were doing. But the other argument they have is that they saw biblical examples of people rebelling against the authority of government, and they would go into the book of Judges, and they would see somebody like Samson. Remember, Samson fought against the Philistines, and they would find others, Japheth and Barak, and all these other people were rebelling against authority. So they felt that they were doing the right thing. Now, whether they were doing the right thing or not, I don't know. That's up to God to judge those people. But one thing I do know is I'm glad that they established this country. This is the greatest country in the world. We have freedom in this country, unlike any other country in the world. There's a lot of people right now are fighting about immigration laws and whether we should have them or what we should be doing with immigrants. Well, the point is, we're a nation of laws, and if you don't like the laws, you can change them. You can vote. You can try to persuade other people to change the laws. You have all kinds of freedom. So whether the Founding Fathers were right in the rebellion against Great Britain, I don't know. But I'm sure glad they did it, because I'm sure glad to be an American. We're going to sing some songs now about America. Joey's all set. And then I want you to stand up. You guys, give me your opinion about why you like America, and just give me your opinion on what's going on in America today. So Joey, let's get it started.